In the United States, there is, for the most part, one accepted craft ritual. It is the ritual, or a version of it, that is worked by the vast majority of the lodges. It is the ritual hammered out by Thomas Smith Webb in the late 1700s. It's known unofficially as the Webb ritual, the Preston Webb ritual, and even the American Rite. But in most cases, it is simply known in the U.S. as the craft ritual. It is most often called by no name because a name is not really necessary. Maybe to better understand the situation, think of a small town where there is only one grocery. The grocery will certainly have a name. It may be the Central Grocery or Joe's Grocery or whatever name they gave it. But the point is that because there is only one grocery in that town, they can just call it the grocery. I'm going to the grocery. Sure, if there were more than one grocery, they would have to identify which grocery, like I'm going to Joe's Grocery. This is the same situation that exists in most areas of the U.S. Masonry. When we in the U.S. talk of the craft lodge, we are almost always talking about one ritual and one rite. Further identification is not needed. Sure, by now many have heard about those 10 Scottish Rite craft lodges under the jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of Louisiana. But it's a big country, and most everywhere else, there is just one ritual. In his paper, The Webb Ritual in the United States, Silas Shepard tells us of the Masons involved in the development of what would become the ritual used by most all of Masonry in the United States. It is an interesting story and provides details not only on the Webb Ritual, but on the players and the events which had a role in the ritual's development. It would seem that just following the American War of Independence, Freemasonry in the United States went through something of an identity crisis. The lodges and provincial grand lodges in the new country were cut off from their mother bodies, mostly in the United Kingdom. There was a period of time when it was not certain what would happen with Masonry in the youthful United States of America. Some felt that maybe there should be one Grand Lodge for the entire country. Suggestions were made that maybe even George Washington should become the first Grand Master. Others felt that if the states were to be truly important pieces in a whole, and that the country was based on the collective authority of the states, then maybe each state should have a sovereign and independent Grand Lodge. When the debates were over, the new country settled on the concept of one Grand Lodge per state, but they also agreed, in theory, on one ritual per state, including the suggestion that they should have one language, which would be English. The idea for Masonry in the United States would seem to be that it was desirous for every state to be independent, but a copy of the other. It would seem that to be like others was good, and to be unlike the rest, not good. Over time, this concept did create problems. One problem was that everyone was not alike. Just to give one example, in 1803, the young United States grew in size by almost a third when it obtained from France the massive section of land known as the Louisiana Purchase. At the heart of this purchase was the very important port of New Orleans. But this was a French territory with most of the citizens speaking French and proud to be of French heritage. Masonry, as best as we can tell, had existed in New Orleans since 1752. Its nature and language matched its members, meaning French. As English-speaking American Masons arrived in the area, they found the Masonry in New Orleans different than the rest of the U.S. It became a problem for them and resulted in Masonic conflict for many years to follow. But since we know that more than one Masonic ritual exists in the world, does it help, hurt, or not matter at all if we limit our lodges to only one ritual? In my opinion, and from the standpoint of initiation, it doesn't matter at all. The differences in rituals are all a matter of choice, a matter of preference, or even just what is available in the area. At best, it is all a matter of taste. The various rituals may have different words, actions, and a different feel to each of them, but at the heart of them all is the Haramic legend. It is that legend and the symbolic teachings woven into it that define a Masonic initiation from other forms of initiation. An initiation is not considered valid because it was done using the words of this or that ritual. An initiation is valid when it reaches in and touches the candidate deep within. Any of the Masonic rites are capable of doing that, or not doing it. Problems for lodges come not because they are practicing different rituals, because they are not performing valid initiations. But in reality, even with the claims of many that there is only one craft ritual in the United States, over time these rituals have changed from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Some variations in ritual are small and some large. It is far more likely that Masonic craft rituals are identical to each other within a jurisdiction than from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. It is because of the fact that jurisdictions are sovereign and independent that they have independently, and over time, made changes to their own ritual. These changes are often unique to their jurisdiction. The 1700s and early 1800s were very creative times in Freemasonry. During the time when the Webb ritual would become the ritual for the bulk of U.S. Masonry, there were many beautiful systems of Freemasonry created around the world. In many areas, multiple rituals work side by side, reflecting the rich nature of Masonic initiation. The enlightened do not view one ritual as better or superior to another, but only as a different path to reach the same destination. The fact that Masonry in the United States does not utilize all of the different rituals can be viewed as a missed opportunity for variety in large meetings, but really, in itself, that is only a minor inconvenience. On the other hand, there is a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding concerning the nature of Masonic rites. This misunderstanding may exist because of the way that Freemasonry developed in the United States. The two Masonic rites which are dominant in the United States are the York Rite and the Scottish Rite. The Scottish Rite, or more correctly, the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, is a 33-degree Masonic system. It was created in 1801 in Charleston, South Carolina. The rituals used by this rite come from older systems and rituals, mainly from France. The other Masonic rite in the U.S. is commonly known as the York Rite and concludes with the degree of Knight Templar. Sometimes also known as the American Rite, it was hammered out around the same time that Webb was working on his craft rituals. Albert Mackey used the term American Rite rather than York Rite, as he felt the system was distinctly an American creation and to avoid confusion with systems and degrees of like name in England. Mackey was not successful in changing the official name of the rite, and York Rite has become the popular and accepted name. Because of the popularity of the two high-degree Masonic systems that have survived in the U.S., and the desire for there to be only one craft ritual, a possibly unforeseen problem has developed. The problem, when looked at from a Masonic ritualistic standpoint, is that for something to be a Masonic rite, it must begin in the craft lodge, and then conclude at whatever final degree exists for that rite. The first degree of any Masonic rite must be the entered apprentice degree. The situation for the United States on first notice is that we have two high-grade Masonic rites that appear to begin after the Master Mason degree, and then continue on to the completion of that system. Most Masons in the United States pay little attention to the degree progression and simply accept that the Masonic rites, the high-grade bodies, begin after the Craft Lodge degrees. They appear separate and independent from Craft Lodge Masonry. Let's look at this situation. A good illustration for this discussion is an old Masonic print titled The Steps of Freemasonry. I find this piece of art very interesting. What I like about this particular piece of art is not that it portrays the actual nature of the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, but that it portrays how Freemasonry is worked from an organizational standpoint in the United States. I'd like to take a moment to examine this art and see exactly what it is telling us as to how we view Masonic rites. The artwork is created along the lines of a pyramid, with a base and two sets of steps going up each side of the pyramid. If you look at the side labeled the Scottish Rite, it shows a step for each of the degrees, and finally the degree of Sovereign Grand Inspector General, which is the 33rd and last degree. On the York Rite side, it also shows steps along with figures representing each of the degrees of the York Rite, concluding with its final step, the degree of Knight Templar. Also, if you look at the center area of the pyramid, there is an arch, and inside of the arch, there are a number of little figures which represent different organizations. This grouping of figures is identified as allied organizations. This collection is composed of organizations such as the Shrine, Grotto, Eastern Star, and other allied organizations. These organizations are outside of the craft lodge or outside of the actual rites of Freemasonry. At the very bottom of the artwork, you see 3 steps which provide the foundation for the whole pyramid. These 3 steps represent the craft lodge and the degrees of an apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. You see here a number of figures ascending up these steps. If you follow their direction, they go to the steps of the Scottish Rite or to the steps of the York Rite. The illusion and message that is given is that you have 3 separate sets of steps available. There is the craft lodge steps, the steps of the Scottish Rite, and the steps of the York Rite. The allied organizations are a bit higher up in the steps, and the suggestion is that once you have received your Master Mason degree, you can apply to these bodies. The shrine is set higher up in the steps in this section, as for many years in order to join the shrine, you would either have to be a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason or a Knight Templar in the York Rite. This prerequisite has changed, and one only needs to receive the Master Mason degree to become a Shriner today. Now, if you take the allied organizations out of consideration and away from the image, you are left with the steps for the Scottish Rite, the York Rite, and the Craft Lodge degrees. The art seems to be suggesting that you have 3 separate entities. Since the Craft Lodge serves as the foundation piece, then once you have completed the steps of the Craft Lodge, you can then advance to the steps of the Scottish Rite or York Rite. The fact is that the Scottish Rite and the York Rite are both complete systems of masonry with their own unique craft lodges. This artwork creates a misunderstanding as to the nature of a Masonic Rite. Both the York Rite and the Scottish Rite begin their degree structure or steps in the Eminent Apprentice degree. What is not delivered in this piece of art is that both the Scottish Rite as well as the York Rite have their own unique craft lodge rituals. All that is represented is the craft lodge. So you don't realize that instead of 2 sets of steps with a common foundation in the craft lodge, it should be 2 complete set of steps, each with their own individual craft lodge steps. Neither the Scottish Rite nor the York Rite begin their degrees after the Master Mason degree. The Scottish Rite and the York Rite begin their systems in their own unique craft rituals. In the New Orleans area, there are 10 lodges working under the jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of Louisiana, which works in the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite craft ritual. This is the actual first degrees of the Scottish Rite, or otherwise known as the Scottish Rite Blue Lodge degrees. As a side note, the Scottish Rite craft lodges in New Orleans area have never been known by the term Red Lodge. The term Red Lodge began and is used in various places around the world to refer to Scottish Rite craft lodges, but not in New Orleans. Regardless of how the poster, The Steps of Freemasonry, illustrates the nature of Freemasonry, the York Rite and the Scottish Rite each have their own unique foundational or craft lodge ritual. The foundational or craft lodge ritual for the York Rite is the ritual used by most all of craft lodges in the United States. The foundational or craft lodge ritual for the Scottish Rite is limited, with rare exception, to the rituals used by the 10 lodges under the jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of Louisiana. These 10 lodges comprise the 16th Masonic District of the Grand Lodge of Louisiana. In other areas of the world, however, the Scottish Rite craft ritual is one of the most popular of craft lodge rituals. I believe the best way to understand the very easy to misunderstand nature of the American Masonic rites is to look at the very early days of Masonry in the United States. Because of the early desire of the Masons in the new United States of America to have one Grand Lodge per state, as well as one ritual per state, it created a situation which made it impossible to have approved multiple rituals worked in any of the jurisdictions. When the 33-degree Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite was created in 1801 in Charleston, South Carolina, a difficult situation already existed in the state. Without getting into a complex history of Masonry in England, there were 2 Grand Lodges in South Carolina which traced their roots to English Freemasonry, but different styles of English Masonry. I would recommend additional reading in the early history of English Freemasonry regarding the ancients and the moderns. These 2 Masonic philosophies resulted in 2 competing Grand Lodges in England one commonly known as the Moderns, and the other the Ancients. In 1813, they overcame their differences and joined together to create the United Grand Lodge of England. In South Carolina in 1801, each of these English-style Grand Lodges existed in the state. This presented problems to the rest of the U.S. Grand Lodges because of their desire to have only one Grand Lodge per state. On the surface, both of these Grand Lodges in South Carolina seemed perfectly regular, and the desire for the balance of the U.S. Masonry was for these two bodies to merge into one. The problem was that the members of these two Grand Lodges had a strong dislike of each other. They simply did not want to merge, as each believed their own Grand Lodge possessed the correct Masonic philosophy. Because of the problems created by these two Grand Lodges and their resistance to merge, it created an impossible situation for the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite when it was created in Charleston in 1801. Simply put, the idea of a third body, the Supreme Council, controlling craft degrees in that state was unthinkable. The two Grand Lodges in South Carolina did eventually put aside their differences, merge, and become the Grand Lodge of South Carolina. The Scottish Rite apparently traded their craft lodges for existence, and only worked as an organization from the fourth degree onward. By doing this, the U.S. Masonic community could maintain their desire for one Grand Lodge and one ritual approved in each state. In Louisiana, and while these 10 lodges working in the Scottish Rite ritual are under the jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge, the simple fact that more than one ritual existed created great problems for Louisiana Masonry in the mid-1800s. The desire for one Grand Lodge and one ritual nearly tore Masonry apart in the state. This one Grand Lodge and one ritual per state concept also created misunderstandings about Masonic rites themselves. As shown in the poster, the Craft Lodge became almost a separate entity rather than the foundational degrees of our Masonic rites. A Masonic ritual is simply the vehicle used to deliver a Masonic initiation. If it were a play, it would be the script. A Masonic rite is a particular type of ritual and all of the degrees that are associated with it. Throughout history, there have been many different Masonic rites and rituals. Each of the historic Masonic rituals and rites have their own unique beauty and manner of symbolic instruction. In the early days of Masonry in the United States, we did have more Masonic rites than we do today. The Order of the Royal Secret, the French Armada Rite, and the Egyptian Rite of Memphis are just a few of the rites that were once worked in the United States. While the creative time in our Masonic history when new rites and rituals were commonplace seems to have passed, who knows what tomorrow will bring? For all I know, a new wave of Masonic rites and rituals could come in our future. If there is one thing of which I am certain, it is that no matter what we have today, it will at some point change.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoy the videos, please hit the like button and subscribe to us. Please pay a visit to the Cornerstone Book Publishers website at cornerstonepublishers.com for outstanding Masonic education. See you next time.